Good morning again, Coffee Chat friend. I'm going to talk this morning a little bit about what I see as a danger of something I'm going to call nihilistic tendencies. Now, danger of, you might ask, well, why is this important to the improving the quality of our life experience? Well, just like any other danger, if we were completely oblivious to the danger of cars going very fast on a highway and we just amble across the highway, that can affect our quality of life in a very detrimental way. So being aware and being able to navigate dangers in life, tendencies in life, just becoming aware of things, I think is important. And I noticed that nihilism, what I mean by nihilism is just, it's like a belief that, kind of like a belief that nothing has any real value to it. I think this can be destructive, and it can lead to almost like hopelessness in having anything that is it has a tendency of clouding values, I would say. So I'm going to just relay a few points that somebody had contacted me with, which I think that would hopefully shed some light on this this tendency that I see out there, and it's come across my desk a few times as of late, if you will, across my desk as in conversations. It had to do with comments, first of all, on what I felt was a desperation, not a desperation, a one way of looking at things in terms of change. And this had to do with government, because I like to talk about sometimes the delusions that we as human beings get ourselves in with religious tendencies, and one of those is government. And the comment was from somebody that had to do with along the lines of changing government, and changing government through revolutionary means. And I had never, I hadn't vocally given much word to this at all, but it wasn't what I meant by changing the way government is. I would more along the lines of change government by osmosis, or just helping people to see things in a different light. And when people realize their own delusion, when I realize my own delusion, it just helps me to move on somewhere else. And it's not that there's no compliance to government regulations anymore. That's about self-defense. It's that the realization that it has no legitimacy whatsoever. It's not based on anything real. It's based on a bunch of superstitions. And those superstitions are backed up by guns, yes. But when enough people realize that it's a superstition, the guns will fall silent, and there'll be no more value in them anymore. Because at the end of the day, a superstition must have the vast majority of people being peaceful within that superstition. It's only the odd dissident which rises up and who says something about it that the guns must be used on. And this actually fortifies the delusion of the many. But when enough people say we've had enough, then it is not really a revolution as we would sense it, as we would normally think it to be. It becomes a critical mass of people just simply changing. And another nihilistic approach, I think, is to equate us human beings as being simple, just merely animals, with no more advanced than any other animal. And this, I had a discussion with several people on this over the last while, and the point being that human beings are no more special than any other animal. And that we, in fact, that matter maybe like base constituents like matter and elements of the earth may actually be superior to us because, after all, our bodies are made up of them. Well, the reason I say this is it doesn't really make sense to me. Maybe I'm missing something. But I would agree that our bodies are made up of elements of the earth and that they would pre-exist a particular body. So in that order of creation, it seems like they're senior. However, I don't see our bodies as us necessarily. I just talked about the person, right? The person of being animated. So the body is a physical construct. And like the old chicken and the egg scenario, what comes first, life or the body? I don't know. But it seems to make sense to me that the body is actually animated by life forces which exist even after the body dies. Because after the body dies, somebody else beside that body still has life force animating his or her body. So that life force, which I don't know if that's an individual thing or force, it still exists. And as far as I know, that's not physical. Nobody has been able to define that, to my knowledge. So it doesn't make sense to me that the matter is higher than us, because I wouldn't say that us is, in fact, even our language, we don't say that that body over there is so-and-so. We say his or her body. So who's the his or her? It's like a possessive, right? It's like something somebody dwells in. It's like that, his or her house, his or her car, or whatever. We don't think of the house or the car as them. It's what they use. It's what they occupy, for example, or inhabit. I'm just going by a few notes here. That's why I'm pausing a little bit once in a while. And the comment was made to that. I think it might have been along the lines of, to do with the identification, the body. It's like, that body is you, right? So the comment was, you are Steve, right? And my answer to that is, no, I'm not Steve. How can I be Steve? Steve is something that somebody made up. That's like saying, I am Toothbrush. No, I'm not Toothbrush. If I decided to use the name Toothbrush, then that would be sort of like a phone number or something like that. It's something used by multiples of individuals to be able to say this individual. So we have a way of expressing, instead of saying, like they say in Newfoundland, hey buddy to everybody. We say hey Steve or hey John or whatever it is. But that's not what we are. That's just a title we use for convenience sake. So another argument that I heard recently was that human beings cannot be superior or more advanced than other created entities like animals, bacteria, and all this sort of thing, because we're not perfectly in control of everything. Well, this to me doesn't make any sense whatsoever. First of all, I would agree that certain animals, and even single-cell animals like bacteria and so on, are more advanced, as was displayed to me through a discussion I had with some family members recently. It depends on the metric that we're using. So for example, if the metric being used is that more advanced is going to be equatable in this discussion to survivability of an apocalyptic event here on Earth, then that could well be true, that the bacteria would outlive us as individual human beings. In that case, yes, they would be more advanced. But this argument that we're not superior because we're not in perfect control of everything, I mean, that would be like saying, a modern Jaguar is not more advanced than a Model T Ford from 100 years ago, because it cannot drive on a sky highway to the moon. Because in Car Godland, there are all these highways, and they are the perfect ones, the car gods. And because this particular car is not able to drive on these fantastical sky highways, that it is not more advanced than the car that was built 100 years ago. To me, maybe I'm missing something, but I would say yes, a modern Jaguar is more advanced over an earlier version, because it has incrementally evolved through learning what was done before and adding to and adding to and adding to and so on. And therefore it is more advanced on a measured level of technology. It has more technology within it. And I would say that that is the case with, at least it appears to be the case, with human beings. Now, there was made the point that in order for us to advance, in order for us to be greater than others, we must have this sort of we must have some sort of a force, like a godly, almost like a godly force within us. Otherwise, we're just the same as everything else. And I would say we do have this force within us, and I just happen to call it life for convenience. Now, I don't know why we over others advance. I mean, there's practical reasons, because we stood up and we have less heat going out of our bodies and whatever, so we're more efficient. But all that aside, I would say that it's more important for me to look at the results. And the results are that we have a very advanced mind, so we're able to think on a much higher level, be consciously aware and so on, self-aware. But most important in terms of what we can actually do, we can build tools, right, on a scale that is completely unparalleled in any other animal that I know of. Completely unparalleled. You know, some animals have learned to drop a rock on another thing to crack it open or whatever, but apparently the New Caledonian crow or something like that can adapt fairly quickly to different tools. But for the most part, the animal kingdom has to wait for what we would call external natural forces to force it to change. I use the example of, say, if a certain bird was relying on a certain grub for its food, for its nutrition, and all of a sudden the climate was to change, and those grubs were largely to be wiped out. Okay, that's a force of nature that the bird didn't come up with. Now the bird would have to learn how to get some other kind of food to bring to its babies and to feed itself. The few that would actually learn that would be the strongest ones, and they would survive, and therefore they would pass that intelligence along through their genetics to their babies as they go. So they would adapt, but they adapted based on physical forces of nature impinging upon them. Human beings, on the other hand, like I say, I could be wrong on this, but this is my observation. Human beings, on the other hand, have the ability to use desire to change how they live. You think of an example. A bird will use the same type of nest, for thousands of years, and it'll only change it when the forces of nature blow upon it for the most part. Human beings, on the other hand, they change their type of houses all the time. All over the world you see different kinds of houses. There are, styles of houses and colors of houses and where the living room is put and how many jacuzzis are in it and all these sorts of things. They change yearly. And this is the case with so many things that we come up with because we have the ability to invent tools to put a spaceship on a comet. This was recently done by somebody. What kind of animal can come close to that? There is no parallel. To me, this is. I think we have the tendency to suspend reason at times in our nihilistic approach, and I think many of us have this tendency to be very reasonable in some areas, and then in some areas, and it has to do with some sort of a religiosity almost. It's almost like a religiosity of areas we're not going to go to use our reason on as well. And it's like all of a sudden, I don't know why it is, but it might have to do with the our upbringings and these sorts of things. I don't know, but there's threatening areas that we don't want to go to, and when we don't want to go there, it ends up as either like a I don't have input there. I'm not going to use my reason there, and that way, that can happen in religious senses, where that's the realm of God. I'm not going to look at that, even though there's evidence that I can. That's kind of like a nihilism too, in a way. Like, I don't have any value that I can bring to this, and to me, it doesn't make any sense. It's a suspension of what we have as a capability. See if I'm missing anything here. Yes, we have the capacity to build tools. Okay. Coming back to government, once again, we're talking about the ways of changing government, and this is also a tendency that human beings have, which is to get stuck in a one way of thinking, which is that in order to change something like government, we have to overthrow it, and which to me has a violence, sort of a violent sense to it, and also the comment was made somewhere along the lines of the only way. Well, I would disagree that when that revolutionary change has only one way. Certainly there is the violent overthrow, and I don't think this is helpful, because when you have something that's violently overthrown, you had to use violence, and so after the revolution you still have violence, and that's why all violent revolutions end up with basically more violence after the fact, because you had to be more violent than the existing regime in order to beat them, so that violence carries on. Now, I think the other way to do it is like a peaceful revolution in a way, which is maybe sort of an oxymoron, but when enough people get that the current way is ineffective or inefficient, that they can change. And I use the example of the difference between the American way of getting rid of slavery and the Brazilian way of getting rid of slavery. In the American way, so we're told anyways, although I don't believe the whole story, there was much more to it than what we're told, I think. But in the story anyways, the Americans overthrew slavery, overt slavery, by having a war. And as a result, they had to use slaves. They had to use white conscripts, which are slaves. So they had to use slavery to overthrow slavery. So that's not solving slavery, is it? That's replacing one form of slavery for another form of slavery. And so that's one example, violent overthrow. The other example of peaceful overthrow was in Brazil, where they just stopped using slaves. And basically, enough people understood it that it was perhaps they did, I don't know why, but they just stopped catching slaves, and slavery was over. There was no revolution, there was no violence. That's an example of a revolutionary change which didn't require violence. Without a bloodbath, that is. Now, as far as having to overthrow government, I would once again, along the lines of the example of the American versus the Brazilian way of getting rid of slavery, I would say that it is possible to have a change of governance without violence. Because basically what's happening now is many, many people are starting to see government for what it is, if you really think about it. Like a dangerous religion run by fraudsters, thieves, and murderers. That's what it is when we really get rid of the candy coating icing and look at it for what it actually is. Yes, these people are complying with these dictates that government puts forward because that is for their own protection. But they no longer worship the God of government. That's key. They no longer worship it. They no longer give any credence to the hymns that are sung to government. And therefore, they begin to teach their kids about what they're learning. The benefits of living peacefully, for example. When this happens, the rate of non-participation goes up. And when I say non-participation, it's like giving any credence, any legitimacy. Complying for self-protection, yes. But underground, working like a resistance education system, like an underground, begins. And what happens is that anybody who's left, who's foolish enough to believe in government, will be pitied for the mental delusion that they have. And they'll be offered help through organizations like Alcoholics Anonymous. Yes, all of this can be done without a violent overthrow and will be much more effective. And also, in terms of the overall topic name, in terms of nihilism, it will be helpful in that area as well, because my understanding, maybe I'm missing something, but my understanding of nihilism is it results in kind of like a helplessness. We have what we have, oh well. Well, when we don't suspend our sense of reason in any area, we keep it going. We don't allow religious tendencies to creep in certain areas. Then we can allow for possibilities where there didn't seem to be possibilities otherwise. And when we allow for that, then ideas can come to us and we can work with them on a reasonable way and see that there is the potential for peaceful change as well, and realize that we have capacities that are, it doesn't matter, going back to the beginning talking about the difference between us and animals, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day who's more advanced. What does that matter anyways? That's almost like a little bit of a nihilistic thing too as well, because it's like saying, I'm no more advanced than the earthworm, so why bother, kind of thing. That's my sense, that's the tendency. It doesn't matter if the earthworm is more advanced. Let the earthworm be more advanced. I don't care. The point being that I'm saying is we have our capacities. Let's deal with that. Let's be as peaceful as we can. Let's promote peace. Let's promote being reasonable and using our reason in all areas. Let nothing be a taboo subject for us to question, for us to inquire, and let's begin to see things for what they are, rather than the facades that they are. If somebody is creating violence towards others, we can strip away the uniforms and the supposed authorities and whatever, and realize it's just one human being creating violence upon another human being. It doesn't matter what they're called. When we begin to work on these things, strip things down to their basics, wow, does life really take on a certain quality to it? I think there's great potential for us. And it doesn't matter whether there's others who are greater than us. To me, it doesn't matter. We have our capacities, and we don't have to be, I think, quite so nihilistic. We can be more hopeful, and I think that helps the quality of our life experience. I know it's been a bit of a ramble. It's been great talking to you again. My name is Steve. I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.